in the quiet heartland of America, where the wind carries the scent of wheat and silence settles over small towns like a blanket, a darkness was growing hidden beneath the face of an ordinary man. Wichita, Kansas, in the early 1970s, was the kind of place where everyone waved at each other, doors were left unlocked, and the nights felt safe. But inside one of those neat suburban houses lived a man whose calm demeanor concealed something monstrous. His name was Dennis Rader, the man who would later call himself the BTK Killer, a name that sent shivers through the entire nation. BTK stood for bind, torture, kill, a phrase that defined not only his method but his identity. Rader didn't just murder, he performed his crimes like twisted rituals, leaving behind clues, letters, and terror that would paralyze Wichita for decades. What made him even more terrifying wasn't just his cruelty, was how normal he appeared. By day, he was a church president, a husband, a father, and a compliance officer at the local government. But by night, his fantasies took over, fantasies that demanded real victims. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the oldest of 4 sons. His childhood wasn't marked by violence or abuse, but by neglect and a cold emotional distance. His parents worked long hours, leaving young Dennis alone most of the time. He would later claim that this loneliness fueled his dark imagination. From an early age, Rader had disturbing fantasies. He would tie up stray animals, imagining control and power. To the world, he was a quiet boy, polite and unassuming, but inside him was a storm that no one could see. By the time he reached his teenage years, Rader's fantasies had evolved. He became obsessed with voyeurism, often watching women through their windows. He'd sketched drawings of women bound and gagged midges that represented both control and fear. This obsession with domination grew stronger as he entered adulthood. After high school, he attended Kansas Wesleyan University, but dropped out after just 1 year. Later, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, serving from 1966 to 1970. The structure and discipline of the military seemed to appeal to him, giving him a sense of order, but it never erased the chaos inside. When Rader returned from service, he appeared to settle into an ordinary life. He married Paula Dietz in 1971, a woman known for her kindness and religious devotion. Together, they moved to Park City, a suburb of Wichita. They had 2 children, a picture-perfect family in a modest home. Dennis worked at a meat company, later joining the local ADT security services, where his job involved installing home alarm systems. Ironically, many of his future victims would use the same company out of fear of the killer, who would later turn out to be Rader himself. But behind that calm domestic life, the BTK fantasy was growing restless. He craved attention and control, not just over his victims, but over the entire city. He wanted to be feared, to be known. And in January 1974, he decided to make his fantasy real. That winter morning, Rader stalked his first victims, the Otero family. Joseph and Julie Otero lived with their 2 children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., in a quiet neighborhood in Wichita. Rader had watched them for weeks, learning their routines. He wanted complete control, and this family, he believed, would be the perfect beginning to his project. On January 15, 1974, Dennis broke into their home. Armed with a gun and a plan, he confronted the Oteros, claiming he was a fugitive seeking money and a car. But his real intentions were far darker. One by one, he tied them up, his voice calm, his movements methodical. He tortured them emotionally, making them watch each other's terror. Then, he killed them. Julie, Joseph Sr., young Joey, and finally, Josephine, whom he hanged in the basement. The brutality of that morning would haunt Wichita forever. When police discovered the scene, they were shocked. Nothing like this had ever happened in their city. But Rader didn't stop there. He wanted credit. He wrote his first letter to the local newspaper, taking responsibility for the murders. In it, he described what he had done in chilling detail, and signed it with a name that would soon be infamous, BTK. The letter was full of grammatical errors and strange phrases, but it made one thing clear: this killer wanted to be seen. He wanted his crimes to be remembered. And as police scrambled for leads, Dennis Rader walked freely through the same community, smiling, attending church, and pretending to be one of them. Over the next few years, Rader would continue his spree, always targeting women who matched his fantasies. He called them his projects. Between 1974 and 1991, he murdered 10 people, each attack meticulously planned, each victim chosen carefully. He would stalk them for weeks, study their lives, and then strike when they least expected. After each killing, he'd take trophies, photos, personal items, or even clothing to relive the moment later. His crimes weren't impulsive. They were calculated performances designed to satisfy his ego. What's even more disturbing is how he balanced these horrors with his daily life. He was active in his local Lutheran church, where he served as president of the congregation. He organized scout meetings for his son and volunteered in the community. Nobody suspected him. To his neighbors, Dennis Rader was the man who helped fix fences, waved at the mailman, and went to work on time. But to the victims of Wichita, he was the faceless predator who could be anywhere watching, waiting. After his initial murders, BTK went silent for years, leading many to believe he had either died or been arrested for another crime. But Rader was simply hibernating. His hunger for recognition never truly went away. In the early 2000s, a new wave of interest in cold cases began, and BTK's legend started resurfacing in the media. That attention reignited something inside him. He wanted to remind everyone that he was still there. In 2004, 30 years after his first killing, Dennis Rader sent a new letter to a local television station announcing BTK's return. It contained photos, crime scene drawings, and a word puzzle, signed once again by BTK. The message was clear. He was still alive and still wanted the world to know his name. But what Rader didn't realize was that this time, technology had advanced. His pride and need for attention would become his downfall. By early 2005, the Wichita police received a floppy disk from BTK himself sent to them after he asked foolishly whether the disk could be traced. The police lied and said no. When Rader sent it anyway, forensic experts traced the metadata back to a church computer registered to Dennis Rader. Within days, surveillance confirmed it. The monster hiding in plain sight had finally been caught. On February 25, 2005, police surrounded Rader's vehicle. When they arrested him, he simply said, "Oh my God, it's me." There was no struggle, no denial, just calm acceptance, like a man who knew his performance was over. In custody, Rader confessed in horrifying detail. He described each murder, his methods, and his motivations. His words were cold, mechanical, almost proud. To him, these were not murders, they were projects. Moments of control and perfection. The investigators who interviewed him said he spoke about his crimes the way someone might talk about fixing a car or writing a report. His emotionless delivery stunned even the most hardened detectives. By June 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. During his court appearance, he described every killing step by step, emotionless, as the families of his victims wept. His lack of remorse confirmed what everyone already feared. BTK wasn't driven by rage or revenge, but by obsession and ego. When the judge sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, there was no dramatic outburst, no final words of regret. Rader simply nodded, almost relieved. For over 30 years, he had played the role of both killer and citizen, predator and neighbor. Now, he was stripped of his mask. And yet, the question remains, what happened next? What became of the man who terrorized Wichita for decades and left behind one of the most disturbing criminal legacies in American history? When Dennis Rader was finally captured in February 2005, the entire world stood frozen. For over 3 decades, he had haunted Wichita and Park City, Kansas, like a ghost, killing, taunting, then disappearing. But when his face appeared on the news, the public couldn't believe it. This wasn't the image of a man who had stalked and strangled innocent families. He looked ordinary, a husband, a father, a church deacon, a code enforcement officer, a man who blended perfectly into the fabric of small-town America. Yet behind that calm smile was one of the most methodical serial killers in American history, a man who lived 2 completely separate lives, one as a respected community member, and the other as the self-proclaimed BTK Killer. Bind, torture, kill. Rader's double life remains one of the most chilling aspects of his story. During the day, he attended church regularly, sang in the choir, and enforced city regulations as part of his job. At night, he transformed into the predator who would stalk neighborhoods in the shadows. His wife, Paula, had no idea. His 2 children never suspected. Even his neighbors described him as friendly but strict, a man obsessed with order and rules. He had an eerie ability to compartmentalize his world, separating the family man from the hunter. To him, the BTK persona wasn't just a name, It was a second identity he nourished for decades, feeding it with fantasies, drawings, writings, and carefully planned crimes. Inside his home, he hid photos, newspaper clippings, and trophies from his victims. Each trinket reminded him of the control he once had over life and death. It wasn't about violence alone. For Rader, it was about domination. After his early murders in the 1970s, BTK vanished from the public eye. Police assumed he had either died, moved away, or gone dormant. For years, no new leads emerged until 2004, when a local newspaper received a peculiar letter. It was written in a style eerily similar to the original BTK communications from the 70s. The sender hinted at details only the real killer would know. Enclosed were photographs, a word puzzle, and a chilling confession. "I'm still here." Investigators couldn't believe it. BTK was back, after 25 years of silence. But technology had evolved. What Dennis Rader didn't realize was that the digital age would become his undoing. BTK wanted to play his old game again. He craved attention, the feeling of power that came from taunting the police and media. In one of his letters, he asked investigators a question. Can a floppy disk be traced back to a computer? Be honest. Police responded through the local newspaper, pretending to cooperate. They said no, that it would be safe to use, and so, Dennis Rader made the fatal mistake. He sent a purple floppy disk to a Wichita TV station. Forensic experts quickly analyzed it and discovered metadata linked to a Christ Lutheran Church document authored by someone named Dennis. A quick search confirmed that Dennis Rader was the church president. Within days, surveillance and DNA evidence connected him to the BTK crimes. After 31 years, the mask finally cracked. On February 25, 2005, police pulled over Dennis Rader while he was driving near his home. The officer asked him to step out of the vehicle. "Mr. Rader," he said, "do you know why you're being arrested?" Rader sighed and replied quietly, "I have suspicions why." Inside his house, investigators found a chilling archive, writings, photographs, victim plans, and sketches of bound figures. He had documented his murders with the precision of an archivist. Every single crime scene had been rehearsed, planned, and recorded in his mind long before it happened. During interrogation, Rader stunned investigators by confessing in gruesome detail. There was no hesitation, no beseebler remorse. He described each killing as if recounting a routine task. He told them how he stalked his victims, how he studied their patterns, and how the act of control fueled his fantasies. In his mind, BTK was a project, something to maintain, perfect, and chronicle. He spoke in a calm, emotionless tone, occasionally slipping into his BTK persona, referring to himself in the third person. BTK liked to watch. He had his own little world. The interview recordings chilled even veteran detectives. One of them later said he was polite, articulate, and completely devoid of empathy. That's what made him so terrifying. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader stood before the court and pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. But even in court, he couldn't resist taking center stage. He described each murder in clinical, graphic detail, the binding, the torture, the killing. Some jurors and family members of the victims broke down in tears. Others left the courtroom unable to bear it. Rader spoke as if he were giving a presentation. At one point, he even corrected the prosecutor on the timeline of his own crimes. The judge sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, effectively ensuring he would die in prison. Rader's reaction: he simply nodded, expressionless. There was no dramatic outburst, no remorse, no emotion. He was finally caged, but his mind seemed satisfied, as if the story of BTK had reached its final chapter. Today, Dennis Rader resides in the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, serving 10 consecutive life sentences. His daily life is stripped of the control he once obsessed over. He spends 23 hours a day in his cell, with limited access to reading material and no direct contact with other inmates. Guards describe him as compliant but manipulative, still craving attention, still trying to insert himself into media coverage about his crimes. In letters to journalists, Rader has attempted to reinvent himself as a kind of criminal expert, offering commentary on other killers. He calls himself Bill Thomas Killman, his old alias BTK, as if he can't let go of that identity. Despite being locked away, his hunger for recognition persists. Over the years, Rader has exchanged correspondence with true crime writers, law enforcement, and even fans who are strangely fascinated by him. In these letters, he often switches between self-pity and ego. Sometimes he portrays himself as a misunderstood man who simply lost control. Other times, he boasts about his planning skills, his intelligence, and his projects. But there are rare moments where his humanity flickers through. He's written about missing his family, about the shame he brought to his wife and children. Still, even those words feel calculated. His daughter, Kerry Rawson, has spoken publicly about the pain of discovering her father's secret life. She described the day the FBI told her the truth, that the man who tucked her into bed was also the BTK Killer. Her book, A Serial Killer's Daughter, explores the unimaginable trauma of reconciling love and horror of knowing that the man who raised her also destroyed countless families. After his arrest, Paula Rader, Dennis's wife of 34 years, filed for divorce immediately. She changed her name and withdrew completely from public life. His son and daughter have lived in the shadow of their father's crimes ever since. For them, the name Rader carries a lifetime sentence of its own. In interviews, Kerry has said she chooses to forgive her father, not for him, but for her own peace of mind. Yet, she refuses to excuse what he did. He's still my dad, but he's also a monster. Both can be true. Those words echo the larger tragedy of the BTK case. The way one man's evil tore apart not just his victims' lives, but his own families too. As of today, Dennis Rader remains imprisoned at El Dorado Correctional Facility, Kansas. He is now in his late 70s, aging and isolated. In 2023, he reportedly suffered minor health issues but continues to write letters and grant occasional interviews through approved channels. Law enforcement still occasionally consults him, not because they admire him, but because they hope his insights might help in unsolved cases. Recently, investigators in Oklahoma and Missouri revisited cold cases that share eerie similarities to BTK's methods. Rader, of course, denied involvement, but investigators remain cautious. Even from behind bars, his shadow still stretches across the Midwest. BTK's story is not just about murder, it's about deception, control, and the masks people wear. He wasn't a creature of the night hiding in dark alleys. He was the man next door, the one who waved to his neighbors, the one who fixed broken mailboxes and sang hymns on Sundays. That's what makes Dennis Rader so haunting. He didn't just kill, he performed his crimes with a chilling sense of normalcy. His story forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people around us? The story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, ends not with a dramatic downfall, but with silence. No glory, no legacy, no audience. Just an old man in a cell, trapped with the only person he ever truly loved, himself. The world has moved on, but the echo of BTK's crimes still lingers in the quiet suburbs of Wichita, in the memories of families he destroyed, in the nightmares of those who remember his letters, his taunts, his name. Bind, torture, kill. 3 words that defined a monster, and 3 words that now define his eternity. Years have passed since Dennis Rader, the man once known as BTK Bind, torture, kill, was finally captured, and yet the shadow of his crimes continues to stretch across Wichita, Kansas. People who lived through his reign of terror still lowered their voices when his name is mentioned, as though the very sound might awaken something sleeping in the darkness. Inside his cell at El Dorado Correctional Facility, the man who once controlled life and death with chilling precision now wakes to the same metallic clang of the morning count. His world reduced to concrete walls, a steel bed, and memories that never let him rest. He is 78 now, frail but sharp-minded, and to this day he remains one of the most unsettling enigmas in American criminal history. Prison officials describe him as compliant, polite even. He attends chapel services, sketches, writes letters, and occasionally communicates with criminology students who request insights into his psychology. But those who have met him say his eyes are cold, still calculating. He speaks about his murders with a kind of pride, describing them as projects, as if they were pieces of art rather than the destruction of human lives. He keeps meticulous notes about his life, documenting daily routines and thoughts, perhaps trying to maintain control in the only way he still can. He has said in interviews that he is at peace and that he has confessed everything, but investigators aren't convinced. In recent years, new investigations have reopened old wounds. Detectives have been re-examining unsolved cases in Kansas and neighboring states, searching for possible links to Rader. In 2023, police from Osage County, Oklahoma, revealed they were investigating a missing person case from 1976 that could be connected to him. The case involved a 16-year-old girl named Cynthia Dawn Kinney, who vanished after leaving a laundromat in Pawhuska. Rader had written about visiting that same area in his journals around the time of her disappearance, describing what he called a trolling trip. Investigators found eerie similarities between his notes and the geography of the area, prompting a deep forensic review. The possibility that BTK may have killed beyond his known victims reopened national attention on him and reignited the fear that his darkness might stretch further than anyone imagined. Rader, from his prison cell, responded to media inquiries with carefully worded letters, sometimes denying, sometimes hinting, always controlling the narrative. He claimed to be cooperating but also seemed to enjoy the renewed spotlight. Law enforcement officials have publicly stated that Rader is manipulative and untrustworthy, a man who thrives on attention even from behind bars. His daughter, Carrie Rosson, who has spent years trying to heal from the revelation that her father was a serial killer, has been deeply involved in helping investigators uncover the truth. She has become a reluctant advocate for victims of trauma, writing a book titled The Serial Killer's Daughter, and speaking openly about her struggle to reconcile the loving father she knew with the monster she later discovered. Carrie described how she initially believed her father was a normal man, church president, Boy Scout leader, city compliance officer. She recalls family camping trips, Christmas dinners, and movie nights, never suspecting that the man tucking her in at night was the same one binding and killing innocent people in basements and bedrooms across Wichita. Her voice trembles when she talks about his manipulative charm, how he could act so perfectly ordinary while hiding such monstrous desires. Over time, Carrie cut off communication with him, though she occasionally cooperates with law enforcement when new evidence arises. In recent interviews, she's expressed fear that her father may still be manipulating people from prison, enjoying the chaos surrounding his name. Inside El Dorado, Rader continues his routines. He eats at the same hour every day, writes in his journals, sketches, self-portraits or drawings of houses and Nazi symbols of his old fantasies. Guards who have served there for years say that when he walks into the chow hall, the room goes silent. Even among murderers and lifers, BTK commands a kind of dreadful respect. He sometimes receives mail from admirers, people fascinated by true crime, who send him letters asking for his autograph or insights into his methods. The prison screens and censors most of them, but enough slip through to remind everyone that the strange cult of fascination around serial killers still exists. FBI profilers occasionally revisit Rader's case when training new agents. His behavior, his ability to blend into suburban life while carrying out unspeakable acts remains a cornerstone of criminal psychology courses across the U.S. His detailed communications with the media, his game of cat and mouse with police, his coded letters, all of it demonstrates how ego and control drive certain killers far beyond any rational motive. Rader once said that part of what thrilled him was outsmarting the police, the power of being invisible. That arrogance, ironically, led to his downfall. In 2005, his own computer disk betrayed him, allowing investigators to trace it back to the church where he volunteered. It was the perfect symbol of his undoing, man who prided himself on control being caught by his own hubris. But even now, he seems to believe he won in some way, because people still talk about him. That's what unsettles those who study him. BTK's crimes weren't just about killing. They were about legacy, about ensuring his name lived on through fear. And to his twisted mind, prison might be just another stage for that performance. In recent years, documentaries and podcasts have brought renewed focus to his case. Netflix, A&E, and various true crime YouTubers dissect every detail, sometimes even using Rader's own words from police interviews. Each time his story resurfaces, survivors and victims' families have to relive the trauma. They speak about the pain that never fades, about how the name BTK became a permanent scar on their lives. Some of them have called for media outlets to stop giving him attention altogether, arguing that every mention only fuels his ego. Yet society's fascination with evil seems endless, and Dennis Rader remains a symbol of that obsession. He is a reminder of how easily monsters can hide behind normal faces, how horror can live next door. Today, when visitors pass through El Dorado's gates, they sometimes catch a glimpse of him, a thin old man in glasses, shuffling across the yard in a beige jumpsuit, his head slightly bowed. To a stranger, he might look like any elderly inmate, but those who know who he is say there's something chilling about the calmness in his movements. He has no parole, no release date. He will die behind those walls, just as he deserves. But even death may not silence his story, because the legend of BTK is now part of America's collective memory, a cautionary tale of arrogance, obsession, and the darkness that can lurk beneath an ordinary smile. The most disturbing truth about Dennis Rader isn't just what he did at how long he went unnoticed. For 3 decades, he was the man mowing his lawn, waving at neighbors, sitting in church pews beside his victims' families. He lived among them, unseen, until the mask finally cracked. And perhaps that's what still haunts Wichita the most, the realization that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the man next door, smiling politely, already imagining how he'll bind, torture, and kill again. As the years fade and Rader's health declines, the world waits for the final chapter of his story. But for those who lost loved ones, closure will never truly come. BTK's crimes were more than murder. They were violations of safety, of trust, of the illusion that we can truly know the people around us. And as Dennis Rader sits in his cell tonight, staring at the wall, perhaps he still smiles to himself, knowing that after all these years, we are still talking about him.